Welcome back to Andy Does Guitar. I am Andy, and this is my guitar. This is a Flying V kit that I ordered from China. I've had it for about a week now, and I can honestly say that it is garbage. This kit came with everything that you see right here. The neck, the body, pickups, gold hardware, classy, and even probably the crappiest set of strings I have ever played. Put it together myself, and that was no small feat. Nothing about this guitar fit properly. The neck didn't fit in the body properly, so I had to make some adjustments right there. The pick guard didn't fit on once the neck was on, which I had to make some adjustments there. The bridge is actually mounted over the pick guard through these holes in the pick guard, and that doesn't fit properly. So yeah, this thing's been a whole mess, but my main plan with this was, because I have the Brendan Small Epiphone Thunder Horse, I was going to try to use this to recreate the Brendan Small signature Flying V Snow Falcon. But once I started putting this thing together and just realizing how much of a piece of crap it is. Most guitar kits are like decent enough, but this one is just... yeah. Once I started putting it together, I started thinking, like, there's no way I can get this thing to look anywhere close like the Snow Falcon. I mean, come on, that thing's just... it's classy looking. I didn't want to just leave this as is. I mean, this is literally just bare wood. They didn't even seal the wood. I started thinking, I wonder if I could turn this into a really cool relic. You never really see relics of Flying Vs. I don't think I've ever seen one, so I had to do some research to see if I could find out how Flying Vs age over time. But while I was doing that, I came up with another idea of something that I can do with this guitar. And I suddenly realized, oh, I have seen a relic Flying V before. It's just not a real one. It just happened to be animated. So that is what I'm going to do with this Flying V kit that I got from China. That is a piece of crap. I'm going to deliberately make it a piece of crap, but I'm going to make it look like Toki Wartooth's piece of crap from the Doomstar Requiem. And I think it's going to turn out pretty cool. I really like Relic guitars. I really like the look and feel of those guitars, and so I'm kind of excited to see if I can actually pull it off with the Flying V, but I'm also super excited that I get to try to pull it off with Toki Wartooth's guitar from the Doomstar Requiem. So I put this thing together to see if I could. I did. It sucks. So now, we gotta take it apart. So the first thing I gotta do is take these strings off, and I gotta tell you that was pretty cathartic. These strings were just the worst. And we just gotta pry off the rest of these parts, and remember when I said nothing on this guitar fit? Yeah, the knobs didn't even fit. I had to hammer them in place, which is why I'm using a screwdriver to pry them off. And everything else goes with it, and while we're right here, I might as well show you something. This thing was such a pain to put together. I wanna see if you can see this. So, look at this. Knowing full well that a pickguard is gonna go on here, there's no channel that goes from the neck pickup to the bridge pickup. So you have to run that wire through this piece of wood, and then run both of the wires through this piece of wood, and still somehow have enough room to wire your pots and switch on there. Probably doesn't look much right here just looking at it, but I mean, I gotta tell you, this is the weirdest guitar that I've had to wire together just because it's so poorly designed. Maybe. Go inside. It's too hot for you. I'm going to finish taking it apart, and the first thing I'm going to do is tape up the frets so I can use wood sealer. I don't want to use any of that on the fretboard. The fretboard's going to have its own treatment later on. Now this stuff sprays on pretty thick, and it takes a couple of hours to cure, so I'm going to spend a day spraying this with about 5 or 6 coats and then let it cure overnight. So, one thing that I did that I didn't show. This cavity was used for the output jack, but that is not consistent with the Gibson Flying Vs, which put their output jack on the pickguard. I filled this cavity with some wood putty, waiting for it to dry, and now I'm going to sand it smooth and see if it actually works. Spoiler alert, it didn't work as well as I was hoping to. But since I'm deliberately making this look like an old crappy guitar, I'm not too concerned about it. Now that the wood sealer is cured overnight, I'm going to take a sanding block and 400 grit sandpaper and smooth it all down. And while I'm right here, I'm going to use the router to route out the new channels for the wires that are going to make putting this thing back together a lot easier. Now it's time for the paint. I'm going to use nitrocellulose paint because it's going to be very important for one particular thing that I want to do to this guitar later on. And it turns out that this stuff dries pretty quickly, so I'm going to spray about 8 coats and then leave it to cure overnight. So we're on day 2 of spraying the guitar, and I'm only now realizing that this wood is a lot more porous than I was expecting. It felt smooth, and I should have known better. So really what I should have done before the sealer is I should have started with grain filler, then sealer, then started painting it. But I don't really feel like starting over, so you live and you learn, and we're going to hope for the best. Once it's cured, I'm going to wet sand it down with 400 to make it nice and smooth before I apply any more paint. And for cleaning up all the excess residue, I usually use rubbing alcohol because it dries pretty quickly. And I'm going to do the same thing I did yesterday. About 8 coats, I'm going to let it cure overnight, then I'll wet sand it and put some more paint on. While that's curing, I can start working on the hardware. This piece of crap black pickup that it came with, yeah, I'm just going to toss that out because I don't need it. I'm going to use this one instead. Now I want to age it up a little bit, but I don't want to make it look too old, because the thing with Toki's guitar is that it's not necessarily old, it's just beat up. So first I'm going to wet sand it with 1000 grit sandpaper just to scuff up the finish a little bit and get rid of the shine. And I also did the same thing to this. This is just a fake truss rod cover that I found on eBay. But now just bear with me on this one, we're going to let it soak in coffee overnight. Trust me, it works. And so that takes care of the aged plastic look, but remember, Toki's been living out on the street, so we gotta grime this thing up a little bit. And with that, I'm going to use black shoe polish. So I'm going to take a wet paper towel and just get a little bit of shoe polish on there and rub it over the entire pit guard. Then using some rubbing alcohol, I'm going to wipe it all off. And when all that's done, I've got a nice, old looking pit guard. Up next is the hardware. Now I've replaced all of the hardware that came with this guitar with chrome hardware. And there are a lot of different ways to age metal, but this is the best method that I've come up with for guitar parts. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to use some 1000 grit sandpaper to scuff up that finish. And we're going to do this to basically any chrome surface that would be exposed on the guitar, which basically means pretty much every chrome surface. And even just right there, it's starting to look pretty good, but we're going to go an extra step. Now I use etchant solution from Radio Shack, which should tell you about how long I've had this bottle just sitting on a shelf. I'm going to get a little bit of that etchant solution onto a paper towel. I'm just going to rub it on the finish, and you can instantly see it just starts kind of rusting up. And so I'd wipe it off, and you can't leave it on for too long because it will just eat through the entire finish. And it's kind of a weird thing to say, you know it's working because it smells like old bass string. But when it's all done, it definitely looks like this thing has been places. So just to give you another example, I'm going to show you how this works on these Grover tuners that I got. Now these tuners were already used when I got them, so they were a little beat up. I just want to get them just a little more consistent with the rest of the hardware I'm working on. And so you can definitely tell the difference between these two, where one is treated and one isn't. So I'm going to do this to all of the chrome hardware on the guitar and then get back to the body. Just a quick progress report. We are done painting it because we ran out of paint. I only got 2 cans of the stuff. I probably should have gotten more, but this is the first time I have actually worked with nitrocellulose, and I didn't realize that it sprays so thin. I was wondering why it dried so quickly. So, 1, the wood is more porous than I realized it is, so we can actually see the grain through the paint. 2, the paint sprayed on a lot thinner than I was expecting because I didn't realize that nitrocellulose sprayed on that thin. It's going great so far. Now we're gonna start with the clear coat, and hopefully this thing still turns out decent in the end, but I don't know. It's been about 5 years since I painted a guitar, and I think I might be a little rusty. For the clear coat, I'm using Colortone Clear Gloss, which is nitrocellulose based, which is, again, is going to be really important for one thing that I'm going to do later on. And so there's no reason to show you all of it, but I did the exact same thing that I did with the paint. I did about 8 coats in a day, let it cure overnight, wet sand it, another 8 coats, so you get the idea. And once it's all cured, it's time for the fretboard. And so for the fretboard, I'm going to be using True Oil once again like I did on the Thunder Pony. So I taped up all of the frets very carefully, if you remember what happened while I was working on the Thunder Pony. And so all I'm doing with the True Oil is I'm rubbing it onto the frets one by one with an old t-shirt that I don't wear anymore, and I'm going to do this in thin layers. I think I ended up doing about 6 overall. You don't really get a great look at this guitar in the Doomstar Requiem other than a couple of front-facing shots and a close-up of the headstock, so using these 4 screenshots as reference, I'm sketching out roughly where I have to take off some of this finish. To get rid of the finish and get back down to the wood, all I'm doing is taking a razor blade and I'm slowly scraping it off. This part is probably the most time-consuming part of the build, because you have to be patient. You could easily just dig in and get rid of a lot of paint, but you're going to start scratching up the wood and scratching up the finish where you don't want to. So that takes care of pretty much everything you can see on the Doomstar Requiem. So now I just have to use, I guess, creative license to figure out how this guitar would have aged naturally over time. So I'm going to go ahead and give this guitar buckle rash and scrape off just a couple more spots where I think that the finish would have aged naturally. And now it's time for the final wet sand. I'm going to start with 400 and work my way all the way up to 2000. Because I use rattle cans to paint this thing, I got a really bad case of orange peel, so I'm applying a lot of pressure while wet sanding, because I'm hoping that I built up a thick enough layer of clear coat that I can just smooth it all down. And then it's time for polishing. I'm just using some turtle wax that I had lying around in the garage. And I'm not too concerned about having a mirror gloss finish, because this thing's supposed to be old and beat up, and that shine is just going to fade naturally anyway. Now that I've got all these exposed bits of wood that look brand new, I've got to age those to make it look a little older, and with that I'm going to use the shoe polish. And the way I age the wood is I squeeze a bunch of it onto a paper towel and water it down, and then just rub it into the wood. And the final thing I have to do to the finish is why I've been using nitrocellulose. You can try to do this with acrylic or poly-based paints, but it just won't work. It's called checking. So what happens with a lot of these old guitars is that the wood swells over time and it cracks the finish from underneath. And you can do that exact same thing with nitrocellulose artificially fairly easily. All I have to do is warm up the finish with a blow dryer and then instantly spray it with a can of compressed air that I'm holding upside down. The rapid change in temperature causes the finish to crack, but the best part is it cracks from underneath so you can't actually feel it. And then last but not least, all I have to do is add some duct tape to it. And you know what, I've already gone this far, I might as well just age the tape while I'm at it. I'm just gonna scuff it up a little bit with some sandpaper, rub some shoe polish on it, and wipe it off. Now that the body is complete, all that's left to do is put everything together and see how it turned out. Close enough. So there you go. Toki's guitar from the Doomstar Requiem complete. I think I'm gonna call it the Wartooth. I put together a lot of kit guitars and this is probably by far the worst, but you know, in the end it actually turned out pretty good. Hindsight 2020, should have ordered more paint. I did not realize that nitro sprayed on that thin when coming out of rattle cans, but you know what? I think it's alright. And so let's just say that is that, and this is the Wartooth, Toki's Flying V from the Doomstar Requiem. Complete. But before we go, I'll just address one thing that I did legitimately screw up. The hole right here originally from the output jack cavity that I didn't quite fill in enough. I mean, it's not as good as I could have done, so we got one more thing that we got to do to this guitar. As was with the Thunder Pony and the Thunder Horse right here, no Metalocalypse guitar is complete without a banana sticker.